The reports came in on a Tuesday, black patches scattered across the scans, spreading through the liver, mapping across the lungs, and sinking deeply into the bones. The oncologist spoke with that specific, slow kindness reserved for patients who have reached the end of the line. 3 months, maybe less. The clinical timeline was firmly established. Beside him, his wife gripped his hand so tightly her knuckles turned entirely white. He didn't squeeze back. He just stared straight up at the ceiling in complete silence. This graph maps out the typical physiological decline of this particular aggressive cancer. Notice how the trajectory drops steeply and hits a rigid barrier right around the 90-day mark. Standard oncology offers no targeted therapies or surgical interventions to reverse a progression moving this fast. When you look at this fixed endpoint, the biological reality becomes clear. The patient is stripped of all agency. The cells mutate, the organs fail, and the individual has absolutely zero control over the timeline. Faced with a timeline authored entirely by modern medicine, the standard human response is passive acceptance. You put your affairs in order and you wait for the end. But that evening, the man returned home and sent everyone out of his bedroom. He isolated himself completely. Instead of accepting the 3-month deadline, he opened a fresh notebook. On the very first line, he wrote the Hindi script for Shri Ram. By dawn, the physical exertion of this act was obvious. His hand shook from the illness, pressing the nib of his fountain pen down with so much force that the ink pooled heavily into the paper. But he kept filling the pages. What started as one sleepless night escalated into a relentless routine. He wrote the name and whispered the name for 10 to 12 hours straight every day. The act of writing became a physical heartbeat. For those hours every day, the movement of the pen replaced the ticking clock of his diagnosis. He entered a state of profound psychological detachment. The worse his biological condition became on paper, the further he retreated into his singular focus. Daily meals were brought into the room, left on the nightstand, and eventually carried away entirely untouched. When chronic pain flared up, the kind of acute bone pain that accompanies late-stage progression, he ignored the spikes and simply continued writing. Relatives and strangers sent holy water gathered from sacred rivers, along with consecrated oils. He accepted them with a polite smile, set them aside, and went right back to the paper. This grid tracks the sheer volume of his devotion over time. To break past his initial prognosis, he maintained this pace until the 99th day, reaching exactly 125,000 written repetitions. On that 99th day, he finished the final syllable. He set the pen down and firmly closed the cover of the notebook. Immediately, his body gave way. He laid back and fell into a deep, uninterrupted 12-hour sleep, the first actual rest he had experienced since the day of his diagnosis. For 99 days, the patient had replaced the awareness of his deteriorating body with the rhythm of a single repeated name. 9 months later, well past his medical expiration date, the man walked back into that exact same oncology ward on his own 2 feet. The atmosphere in the examination room was tense. The original oncologist pulled up the new scans, blinked, and pulled them up a second time. This diagram shows exactly what the doctor saw. On the left, the initial spread of invasive clusters. On the right, lungs, liver, and bones, completely clear. 2 more colleagues were called. 3 physicians stared in total silence, their clinical certainty vanishing against the clean scans. Finally, the original doctor turned to him. His voice cracked as he asked what specific external medical treatment the man had sought out in secret. The man didn't list a clinic or a trial drug. He placed the battered notebook on the sterile metal desk. Its cover was frayed, worn soft as cloth from tens of thousands of touches. In a world of absolute clinical verdicts, the man chose to author a different sequence of events. The original medical sentence was written in ink, but it was the ink of this notebook that remained at the end.